A rabbi sits on a limestone ridge overlooking the Sea of Galilee, the wind pulling at his cloak, looking out at a crowd of peasants, fishermen, and farmers. They think he is taking the biological reality of noticing a beautiful person and classifying it as a moral catastrophe, effectively condemning every human being walking dollars. In the royal bedchamber, it begins on the roof. It begins in the invisible, silent moment when a man looks at a woman and calculates her as property. Jesus knows this story. The crowd sitting on the grass knows this story. When Jesus tells the men on the hillside that the one who looks to covet has already committed adultery, he is tracing the physical violence of David back to its origin point. He is standing at the headwaters of human destruction. The physical act of adultery is just the final, outward manifestation of a spiritual rot that has already taken place. In the dark, the line has already been crossed. The woman has already been degraded in the mind. But here is where the modern reader completely loses the thread of what Jesus is saying. When Jesus says this happens in his heart, we immediately imagine a reservoir of feelings. We imagine involuntary emotions bubbling up in the chest, assuming Jesus is judging us for what we feel. But the ancient Israelites did not feel with their hearts, and they did not think with their brains. In the modern world, the heart is a Valentine. It is a red emoji. It is a velvet pillow. When your heart beats fast, you are falling in love. When your heart breaks, you are grieving. We place our emotions in our chest, to the earth, to the status of a serial adulterer by the time they are a teenager. We place our logic in our skull. The ancient Israelites did not do this. In Hebrew, the word is lev. In Greek, the word is cardia. If you want to talk about raw, involuntary emotion in the ancient Near East, you do not point to the chest. You point to the gut, the intestines, the bowels. You feel terror in your gut. You feel deep, agonizing compassion in your bowels. The heart is something else entirely. The cardia is not the seat of emotion. It is the seat of the will. It is the steering wheel. It is the command center. It is the place where logic is processed, where decisions are forged, and where intentionality lives. In ancient Jewish literature, you do not feel in your heart. You think in your heart. You choose in your heart. You plan your ways in your heart. So when Jesus says a man has committed adultery in his heart, he is not talking about an accidental spike in heart rate. He is talking about a calculated decision. The modern purity framework fails because it fundamentally misunderstands ancient anatomy. We have made Jesus the warden of biological reflexes. We have told an entire generation of people that their bodies are broken because their eyes naturally notice physical beauty. But Jesus is not interested in biological reflexes. He is interested in human dignity. When a man looks at a woman to covet her, but if you look closer at the original Greek word he chose, at the ancient property laws, dictating the lives of the women sitting in that very grass ewe, his cardia has made a choice. The eyes merely deliver the data. The heart evaluates the asset. The heart mentally makes the purchase. The adultery is complete because the will has already crossed the boundary line, stripping the woman of her personhood, long before the hands ever move. The heart is not a reservoir of involuntary emotion. It is the command center of human action. Jesus takes the law of physical trespass and relocates it. He moves it away from the bedroom. He moves it into the control room. He demands that a man recognize the divine image in a woman at the exact moment his eyes meet hers. He demands that the internal ledger be torn up before the mind can even calculate a price tag. But he does not just preach this abstract concept on a hillside. He steps off the mountain. He walks into the dirt and the chaos of the first-century Mediterranean world. And he begins to interact with women in a way that shatters every single cultural expectation of the Roman Empire. The dust of the temple courtyard swirls around a woman thrown to the ground. Men stand in a tight circle, holding rough, heavy stones in their hands. They look down at her. But they do not see a human being made in the image of God. They see a theological pawn, They see a disposable object they can leverage to spring a legal trap on the rabbi from Nazareth. They have caught her in the physical act of adultery. Start to see something the modern purity reading completely misses. Jesus is not declaring war on human attraction, but they are actively committing the spiritual adultery of the heart. They are using her body for their own gratification. Specifically, the gratification of winning an argument. Jesus kneels in the dirt. He traces his finger in the dust. He forces the men to drop their weapons, not by destroying the law of Moses, but by turning the legal spotlight back onto the hidden ledgers of their own cardia. You can hear the rocks hit the limestone pavement, one by one, echoing in the quiet courtyard. And when the men are gone, he finally stands up and looks at her. Watch how he looks. At women across all four Gospels. The pattern never breaks. A Samaritan woman stands by a stone well in the scorching midday sun. Jesus looks at her and asks for a drink of water. He does not see a cultural enemy or a compromised liability. He sees a theologian capable of understanding living water. A woman pushes through a dense, suffocating crowd, desperate enough to touch the hem of his cloak, to heal her 12 years of bleeding. He stops the entire procession. He does not view her as a source of ritual impurity. He calls her daughter. A woman known for her sins weeps on his feet in the house of Simon the Pharisee, her tears mixing with the road dirt on his skin, the heavy scent of expensive nard filling the room. Simon the Pharisee looks at her and sees a social contagion. Jesus looks at her and sees he is dismantling an empire of consumption. This is not a verse about impossible behavioral management. It is a diagnosis. A worshiper whose massive debt has just been canceled. Jesus is not practicing purity by avoiding the gaze. He is practicing a radical, restorative vision. In a culture that often demanded pious men avert their eyes from women entirely to remain holy, Jesus looks directly at the women the society has marginalized, consumed, or discarded. He refuses to participate in the economy of objectification. When the men on the Galilean hillside look at a woman to covet her, to epithumio, they are practicing a form of spiritual theft. They are stealing her personhood. But Jesus looks at women and returns what the culture has stripped away. He looks at them with the pure, unclouded vision of Eden. He speaks to them as equals. He trusts them with the most profound theological revelations of his entire ministry. And he ultimately makes them the very first witnesses of the empty tomb. He demanded that the men of the first century shatter the invisible property ledgers that govern their eyes. But what happens when that ancient coveting gaze is not just a private moral failure, but the foundational algorithm of an entire global economy? You do not have to stand in the dust of a village square watching silver drop into a leather pouch. We no longer live under the property laws of the Roman Empire, but we have built an entire global architecture designed to do exactly what Jesus condemned. Jesus was not offering a bumper sticker about keeping your eyes on the ground. He was naming a disease that the ancient world accepted as normal business practice. On that hillside, we have industrialized the coveting gaze. You hold it in your hand. You stare into the glowing glass of a smartphone. We have constructed a digital economy that trains the human eye to evaluate a person in a fraction of a second, to swipe left or right, to consume their image and discard them without ever having to acknowledge the divine breath in their lungs. We have normalized a culture where the cardia, the control center of the will, is constantly prompted to strip away human dignity and assign a value based solely on physical appearance. David had to pace on a stone roof in the evening heat to find a body to consume. You just have to reach to the nightstand in the cold blue light of a bedroom. The technology has evolved, but the fracture in the human soul is exactly the same. The algorithms are not neutral. They are engines of epithumio. They train us to look at human beings as content, as dopamine triggers, as products designed for our immediate, silent gratification. But here's the part I keep coming back to. It is the sound of the stones hitting the limestone pavement in the temple courtyard. Jesus did not pick up a rock to fight back against the men who objectified the woman caught in adultery. He did not scream at them. He simply bent down in the dirt. He was diagnosing a fracture in the human soul that reduces a person made in the image of God into a commodity waiting to be acquired. and forced them to look inward, to see how their own ledgers were completely bankrupt. He knew that the only way to break an economy of objectification is to stop participating in it. If you are in a season where you feel consumed by this digital architecture, where the quiet shame of the coveting gaze feels like a heavy coat you cannot take off, Matthew 5 is not a threat. It is an invitation. Jesus is not handing you an impossible burden of behavioral management. He is offering you a way out of the marketplace entirely. He is asking you to surrender the predatory evaluation. He is asking you to look at the person standing in front of you, or the person glowing on the screen, and refuse to draw up a contract of consumption. He wants to take the heavy, exhausting ledger you have been carrying in your mind and tear it to pieces. Because when the gaze is restored, the entire world is rewritten. The silver dropped into a leather pouch, and a woman's worth was calculated on a ledger. The Greek word epithumio echoed from Mount Sinai, and the ancient sin of coveting was brought into the light. A king lingered on a hot stone roof, and a kingdom shattered from a silent calculation. The ancient cardia steered the human will, and the mind forged a contract. The burden this teaching places on the listener is heavy, but it is not the burden of managing involuntary thoughts, of consumption. A crowd of men dropped heavy stones in the dirt, and a rabbi forced them to read their own bankrupt ledgers. A marginalized woman reached for a cloak, and the gaze of a savior returned her stolen dignity. A modern world built. Digital empires of objectification and the invitation to step out of the marketplace remained exactly the same. One teaching, one restored vision. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the dirt. The dust of the temple courtyard. Jesus did not shout down the men who had reduced a woman to an object. He knelt in the dirt, the same dirt God used to form the first human beings in Eden. And he waited until the heavy stones hit the limestone pavement. He did not fight the empire of consumption with more violence. He fought it with a terrifying, absolute stillness. If you are in a season where you are exhausted by a culture of objectification, where the pressure to measure your worth or someone else's by physical metrics feels like a crushing weight, Matthew 5 is a place to breathe. The Sermon on the Mount does not ask you to amputate your humanity. It asks you to look through the eyes of the one who made it. If this shifted something in how you read, it is the burden of how you categorize the humanity of the person standing right in front of you. This text. Subscribe. Leave a comment. Even one word helps. Share this with someone who is tired of the modern purity culture and needs to hear what Jesus actually meant. Pray for us as we keep digging into these ancient texts. And may the God who has never once looked at you as a commodity give you the grace to tear up the ledger, to drop the stone, and to finally see the divine image in the person standing right in front of you. To feel the actual weight of this moment, you have to strip away centuries of modern psychology. The dust of the road is still on their sandals. The air smells of salt and drying nets. You have to step back into a world where a woman's value was measured entirely by the man whose ledger she belonged on. You have to start by looking at what adultery actually meant before it became a feeling. We are a generation obsessed with internal metrics. We track our heart rates, our sleep cycles, the dopamine hits we get from a glowing screen in the dark. And for centuries, the modern church has effectively internalized Matthew 5:28 as the ultimate internal tracking device for human morality. We read the words of Jesus through the lens of Western individualism, a culture where private thoughts are the primary currency of guilt. The standard interpretation operates like a hostile surveillance state within the human mind. A man walks down the street, sees a beautiful woman, feels a biological spark of attraction, and immediately panics. He feels the sweat on his palms. He forces his eyes to the concrete. He carries a heavy knot of shame in his chest for the rest of the afternoon, convinced he has committed a moral atrocity before he even reached the corner. The involuntary thought happened. The boundary was crossed, and therefore the sin is complete. Entire subcultures of religious purity have been built on this anxiety. And he is about to say something that will haunt the human conscience for 2,000 years. People spend decades trying to amputate a biological reflex, exhausted by the constant policing of their own peripheral vision, all because they assume this is what Jesus demanded on that Galilean hillside. But that is a modern psychological framework, mapped backward onto an ancient Near Eastern text. The modern guilt complex relies on a fundamental misunderstanding of what the word adultery actually meant to the people sitting on that grass. When a 21st century reader hears the word, they think of a broken heart. To us, adultery is a violation of romantic trust. It is a betrayal of emotional intimacy. It is the shattering of a private vow between two equal partners who promised to remain faithful. That was not the reality for the men and women listening to Jesus. In the first century Mediterranean world, adultery was not a betrayal of emotional intimacy. It was the violation of a property line. To understand why looking at a woman a certain way was considered such a violent, destructive act by a rabbi from Nazareth, you cannot consult modern psychology. You cannot look at how we understand marriage today. You have to look at the ancient ledgers. You have to unroll the dusty, crumbling Roman and Jewish legal contracts. He has been taking the ancient laws, the laws etched in stone that every person on this hillside has memorized since childhood. You have to read the ink scratched onto parchment that determined exactly how a woman's worth was calculated, and exactly whose estate her name belonged to. And when you examine those ancient legal codes, the words of Jesus suddenly transform. They shift from an impossible burden of behavioral management into a radical, dangerous defense of human dignity. Because, to the ancient legal mind, a woman was not an equal partner in a covenant. She was an asset. A father stands in the hot dust of a village square. He holds a leather pouch, heavy with silver. A young woman stands beside him. Her head is covered. Her eyes are fixed on the dirt. Coins drop from the father's hand into the palm of a new husband. The metal clinks in the dry air. A scribe scratches ink onto rough animal skin parchment. The transaction finishes. The woman shifts from one household to another. She is no longer her father's liability. She is her husband's asset. This is the reality of the first century Mediterranean world. Under Roman law, the paterfamilias, the male head of the household, holds absolute power. Under the cultural interpretations of Jewish law operating in Galilee, a wife is legally acquired. She bakes the bread. She draws the heavy jars of water from the stone well. She weaves the wool. She is protected. Absolutely. And he has been turning them inside out. Do not murder. Do not break your oath. Do not retaliate. Same pattern again and again. She is provided for. Usually, but she does not own herself. Her body, her labor, and her reproductive capacity belong entirely to the man holding the contract. When you understand this, the ancient definition of adultery snaps into sharp, violent focus. If a man sleeps with a married woman, the primary victim in the eyes of the law is not the woman. The victim is not the emotional bond of the marriage. The victim is the husband's estate. Another man has trespassed on a fenced property. Another man has compromised a bloodline. Another man has stolen the exclusive rights of the owner. Adultery is not a romantic tragedy in this world. It is a financial violation. This framework creates a massive, glaring double standard. A married man in the Greco-Roman world can visit a temple prostitute. He can sleep with his own slaves. He can purchase a concubine. Society does not blink. The law does not call any of that adultery. The law only screams adultery when a man takes a woman who belongs to someone else's ledger. Now, look back at the crowd, sitting on the grass around Jesus. The men sit together. The women sit on the edges, pulling their cloaks tight against the wind off the sea. Jesus looks at the men. He knows exactly how the legal system works. He knows the invisible barcodes stamped on the foreheads of every woman on that hill. He quotes the baseline of human behavior, and then he shatters the floor beneath it. But then he reaches the commandment about marriage. A man can walk through the market. He can look at a woman. He can calculate her worth. He can mentally strip her down, evaluating her features the exact same way he evaluates a field of wheat or a strong ox. He can consume her in his mind. And as long as he does not physically touch her, the ancient legal system smiles at him. The Pharisees nod in approval. The ledger remains balanced. His hands are legally clean. The property line holds. Jesus watches this silent, daily violence. He sees the men who think they are perfectly righteous, just because they haven't picked the lock on another man's door. And to shatter this illusion, he does not invent a new concept. He reaches back to the very foundation of the Jewish law, grabbing a single, specific word to pull the whole system down. Matthew chapter 5, verse 28. Jesus sits before a crowd and says, "Anyone who looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his heart." For centuries, English readers have zeroed in on that word, lust, carrying all the baggage of our modern definition, feeling a sudden knot of anxiety in the chest every time the eyes naturally notice physical beauty. The word Jesus actually uses is the Greek epithumeo. It is a compound word, built from epi, meaning upon or toward. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I tell you that anyone who looks at a woman to lust after her, enthumos, meaning a fierce, burning passion or breath. It does not describe a passing glance. It does not describe an involuntary biological spark. It describes a heavily focused, deliberate, calculated fixation. It is an active burning, a concentrated effort of the will to aggressively desire something you do not have. And if you trace this specific word back into the Greek translation of the Old Testament, the Septuagint, the scriptures the early church relied on, you find epithumeo in a very famous passage. You find it etched onto the heavy stone tablets of Sinai. You find it in Exodus chapter 20, verse 17. The 10th commandment, "You shall not covet your neighbor's house." You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, or his male or female servant, his ox or donkey, or anything that belongs to your neighbor. The word translated as covet in that ancient list is epithumeo. It means to look at another person's property, to fixate on it, and to internally scheme to make it your own. If seeing how a single Greek word bridges a Galilean hillside to Mount Sinai is shifting the way you read the Bible, you're exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we go deeper into the text than you knew was possible. So Jesus takes this ancient law of coveting and applies it directly to the human gaze. Has already committed adultery with her in his heart. You have probably heard this verse. If you grew up around religion, it might have terrified you. That root connection changes everything. When Jesus says, "Do not look at a woman to epithumeo her," he is not talking about the biological reflex of recognizing that someone is attractive. He is talking about coveting. He is talking about the predatory gaze that looks at a woman, strips away her dignity, and reduces her to an object designed for personal consumption. Jesus is not outlawing an involuntary feeling. He is condemning a predatory evaluation. The sin is not the first glance of recognition. The sin is the prolonged stare that looks at a daughter of God and calculates how she might serve your own gratification, regardless of her agency or humanity. To commit adultery in the heart is to internally overwrite the divine image of a human being with a price tag, treating them as an asset to be seized, but to truly feel the destructive, collateral damage of this coveting gaze. You cannot just look at the dictionary. You have to look at the most devastating example of it in the entire biblical record, and it begins with a man who should have been at war. Standing on a stone roof in the cool evening air, the sun drops behind the limestone hills of Jerusalem. The stone of the palace roof still holds the heat of the day. David paces. He should be at war. The kings have gone out to battle in the spring, but he has stayed behind in the safety of his city. Most people assume Jesus is doing something very simple here. Most people assume he is policing human attraction. The air is still. He walks to the edge of the parapet and looks down into the courtyards of the lower houses. He sees a woman bathing. The water gleams in the fading light. The steam rises into the cool evening air. Her name is Bathsheba. She is the wife of Uriah, one of David's most loyal elite soldiers, a man currently sleeping in the dirt on the front lines to protect David's throne. David does not look away. He lingers. He lets the gaze settle, harden, and transform into a strategy. Look at the sequence of verbs in the ancient Hebrew text. David sees her. He inquires about her. He sends messengers. He takes her. It is a violent, rapid progression of consumption. David is not overcome by a sudden romantic passion. He is exercising absolute power. He looks at a woman, a human being woven with the image of God, and he internally overwrites her humanity. He reduces her to an object of acquisition. He looks to epithumeo. He covets his neighbor's wife. And because he is the king, because the ledger of the entire nation essentially belongs to him, he simply reaches out and takes the asset. A woman is summoned into the dark. A loyal soldier is murdered with a heavy sword. A newborn child breathes its last. A royal family shatters from the inside out. The devastation of Israel does not begin with the assassination of Uriah. It does not begin